The night Madison Square Garden held its breath, it did so for a man who had long since transcended the ordinary boundaries of the sport. Vasiliy Lomachenko, the two-time Olympic gold medalist from Bilhorod-Dnistrovskyi, Ukraine, walked into the world's most famous arena carrying not just a record, but a reputation, a legacy so carefully constructed over years of mastery that even his opponents seemed to arrive already half-defeated. Across the ring stood Richard Commey, a former lightweight champion of the world from Accra, Ghana, a man with 30 wins and 27 knockouts to his name, a fighter whose 82% knockout rate whispered a very simple truth: he did not need many opportunities to end a fight. What unfolded across 12 rounds that night was not simply a boxing match. It was a collision between raw, thunderous power and something altogether more elusive, a kind of genius dressed in boxing gloves. From the moment the introductions were made, the garden crackled with the electric anticipation of a crowd that knew it was witnessing something rare. Yellow and blue Ukrainian flags rippled throughout the packed arena, a wave of color that told its own story about the global reach of Lomachenko's celebrity. The fighter himself stood in his corner in those final moments before the bell, eyes distant, jaw set, mind already somewhere inside the fight. Those who had watched him before recognized the look. He was downloading, processing, running calculations no opponent could see or interrupt, building a picture of the man across from him before a single punch had been thrown. 2 rounds, he had once said. 2 rounds was all he needed to figure out any opponent in the world. Against Commey, the clock had already started ticking before the opening bell had even rung. Round 1 unfolded with the careful, deliberate tension of 2 experienced professionals feeling each other out. Commey, to his enormous credit, had arrived with a plan. Trained by Andrei Rossi, he understood the geometry of the threat in front of him. He worked to maintain the outside position, leveraging his 5.5-inch reach advantage to keep Lomachenko honest, staying disciplined and refusing to walk into the kind of explosive sequences that had dismantled so many opponents before him. Lomachenko, for his part, was patient. He circled, feinted, moved, throwing shapes that weren't punches but functioned like them, forcing Commey to react, to breathe, to expend tiny fractions of energy and focus that would compound over 12 rounds. The total output in that first round was modest, but the psychological war had already begun. Commey landed 4 punches. Lomachenko was simply mapping the terrain. By the second round, the map was beginning to take shape. Those who understood what they were watching could see the subtle shifts, the slight adjustments in Lomachenko's footwork, the incremental narrowing of the distance he was willing to operate within. A left hand came in, grazing Commey but sending a signal. The right message had been received loud and clear: "I know where you are, and I'm starting to learn where you'll be." Commey responded with discipline, throwing chopping right hands on the inside, keeping his head movement active, refusing to become the stationary target that Lomachenko's game plan required. When Commey worked to the body, landing his best shots of the early rounds, there was brief hope that he might be able to build something. He was throwing without looking for any one specific punch, just letting his hands go, and in those moments of looseness, he found brief success. But Lomachenko was watching, cataloging, filing every piece of information away for later use. The third round was where the fight began to shift in ways that only became fully visible in hindsight. Lomachenko landed a left hand that snapped Commey's head back, a shot that arrived with the kind of precision that makes great fighters dangerous not because of its power but because of its timing. Commey threw the right hand once too often, probing, reaching, and Lomachenko, who had been waiting for exactly that pattern to solidify, moved his head off the line and countered with a left straight down the middle. Boom! The crowd stirred. The arena leaned forward. Commey felt it, shook it off with the kind of jaw and heart that 27 knockouts will teach you to cultivate, and fired back. But something had changed in the room. The tone had shifted from competitive uncertainty to something that felt, increasingly, like inevitability. What made Lomachenko so uniquely difficult to solve was not simply his speed, though that was extraordinary. It was not simply his footwork, though that too was among the finest the sport had ever seen. It was the combination of those elements with a tactical imagination so sophisticated that opponents frequently described the experience of fighting him in the language of disorientation rather than defeat. They didn't just lose. They lost track of themselves. Commey, to his immense credit, refused to let that happen early. He stayed composed, stayed on the game plan, worked the body with consistent purpose. By the mid-rounds he had landed 7 body shots, more than many opponents ever managed against Lomachenko, and for stretches he made the fight competitive in ways that kept the Garden engaged. But even while Commey was having those moments, Lomachenko was banking rounds, compiling a lead on the scorecards that would eventually swell to a margin of 138 punches landed to 44 by the end of round 9. The 7th round was the fight's decisive turning point, the moment when the story hardened into something unavoidable. Lomachenko landed a left-hand flush on the chin, a shot that combined with the accumulation of body punishment already in Commey's system to produce a visible wobble. Commey's legs betrayed him briefly, going soft beneath him in the way that legs do when the brain has taken more than it wants to process. The Garden erupted. And then Lomachenko did something that was simultaneously tactical and theatrical. He pointed to Commey's corner. Not in taunting, exactly, but in the cool, declarative manner of a man stating a fact. He was telling the corner what was coming. He was giving them information. The implication was unmistakable: stop this, or watch me finish it. It was a moment of combat psychology that was as much art as science, designed to rattle the corner, to introduce doubt into Commey's support system, to make the seconds between rounds. Commey survived the 7th. And the 8th. And he did so not through passivity but through something genuinely admirable, a refusal to stop competing even when the evidence all around him suggested the smarter thing was to survive. He threw right hands back at Lomachenko. He dug to the body when he could. He ate punches and stayed upright and kept his eyes open and his hands moving. There is a particular kind of courage in boxing that has nothing to do with winning, a courage that exists simply in the continuation of effort when effort seems futile, and Commey displayed it in abundance through the second half of that fight. Rounds 9 and 10 saw Lomachenko operating in a register closer to exhibition than competition, moving with those angles that seemed to belong to a different physics, landing shots from directions that made no geometric sense, finishing combinations to the body that had Commey exhaling in sharp, involuntary bursts. And still Commey punched back. The crowd, initially so heavily partisan in Lomachenko's favor, began to offer genuine appreciation for the man absorbing the punishment. What Lomachenko was doing to Commey in those late rounds was not just physical. It was architectural. Each body shot chipped away at the foundation. Each head movement that made Commey's punches whistle through empty air chipped away at confidence. Each sequence, the speed, the angles, the shifts in rhythm from fast to slow to fast again, chipped away at whatever internal narrative Commey had arrived with. His trainer André Roger, ringside, was navigating a tension between two competing instructions. Box smart, he urged. Be composed. Other voices from the corner called for more aggression. In the end, Roger prevailed with his counsel of intelligence, and it was the right call. It kept Commey upright. It kept Commey in the fight. It may not have changed the outcome, but it preserved the man, and in boxing, that matters enormously. The 12th and final round arrived with the scorecards already written in everything but ink. Lomachenko held a commanding lead by every metric available: compu box, the judges' cards, the naked eye. But Commey, improbably, defiantly, came out for that last round throwing punches. He heard the crowd clap and responded with combinations. He landed right hands that actually found their target. He threw body shots with the same purpose he'd carried in the first round, as though the 11 rounds between them had not occurred, as though his legs had not gone soft in the 7th, as though the scorecards were blank and anything was still possible. It was, in its own way, one of the most moving things in the fight, not because it changed anything,